Alright guys, so this is the second video talking about types of numbers. In the first video was just talking about integers. In this video, we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite, or probably most least favorite, fractions. Okay, fractions are where a lot of mistakes can happen very easily. Things to know about fractions is you need to know that they're essentially the same as division. There's no difference. And we always use what's called a fraction bar. Okay? And fractions can always be converted to decimals, and decimals always can go back to fractions. But for this class, it's going to be important to know how to work with fractions and not be intimidated by them. Okay? So for example, a simple kind of fraction, if I just say 2/5 or 2/5, okay? Now, if you wanted to convert this to a decimal, there's a bunch of different ways. You could do what I call like old school division. So this is like the same thing as like 5 goes into 2. And you can kind of do an old school division problem like that. Going back to like middle school or even elementary school days, and you can discover that the answer to this is 0.4. Okay, but for this class, you will have access to a calculator. So if you are using a calculator, it's going to be important that you enter it in correctly. So when using a calculator, it's going to be important that you enter it in correctly. Just one right off the side. So if you're trying to do this problem in the calculator, you would go 2 and then press the division key and then 5. And it'll also give you the answer of 0.4. Okay, so that's one thing to keep aware of. You are allowed to use a calculator, but make sure you're entering in correctly. Otherwise, mistakes happen and wrong answers come up. Okay. The second thing about fractions you need to remember is that when you're dealing with negative fractions, a lot of the times they'll put the negative sign in the middle like this. Okay? Now what that means is that the negative is being applied to the entire fraction. Sometimes it'll be easier to give the negative to the top part of the fraction, the numerator. So you can read it as -3/4. Or maybe it's sometimes easier to give the negative to the denominator. Okay, +3/-4. These are all the same exact thing. Okay, they're all equal to each other. Okay, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to give the negative to both. Okay, so not -3/-4. Okay, that is not the same as the previous one. Okay, because what's going to happen is that those negatives cancel. So be careful. If there's negatives, it either applies to the top or the bottom. Your choice, doesn't really matter. Okay? Sometimes it's easier depending on the question. Okay? So that's fractions. Another type of number that we're going to be using in this class is we're going to be using decimals. So I want you guys to make sure you're comfortable with using decimals as well. Okay. Obviously decimals, they don't have a fraction bar, they use a decimal point. And just like fractions can be converted to decimals, decimals can be converted to fractions. Same thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because most students are comfortable with decimals. They struggle a bit with fractions. Okay. And then the third type of number that you're going to be using in this class is what's called a root, or roots. Okay, this will come into play a lot more later on in the class, but I want you guys to be familiar with them now. So I'm sure you've seen this symbol before. That's referred to as a square root. Okay, you've seen those before. You may not have seen these other ones before. For example, this one is called a cubic root. okay? Or sometimes these get referred to as like the third root. This one technically you could call the second root, but not many people will actually say that. They'll always say square root, so be aware of that. And obviously you can keep on going. You can go fourth root, fifth root, sixth root, 100th root. You can keep going as far as you need to, okay? And the way roots work is essentially we try to break down the number and simplify it, okay? So if I give you a question like this, let's say I wanted to know the square root of 80, okay? Now you could go on your calculator and you can type in square root of 80, but it's going to give you a decimal answer. Sometimes in this class, we don't want decimal answers. Sometimes we want the exact answer, okay? So the way we're going to solve this is we're going to take 80 and we're going to break that down, okay? So ask yourself, what are two numbers that multiply together to make 80, okay? Now, the most common one is going to be 8 times 10. Now, there's other combinations. You could have done like 40 and 2. You could have done 20 and 4. You can do all sorts of different kind of combinations. But you start off with one combination, and you're going to keep breaking these numbers down until they don't break down any further. So, for example, 8 can be broken down into 4 and 2. Okay, we keep going. 2 cannot be broken down any further. It's what's called prime. Okay, so I'm going to circle that. 4 can be broken down into 2 and 2. Okay, 2 again cannot be broken down, so I'm going to circle them just so I don't lose track. Then I have to go over this other branch and I have to break 10 down. Okay, 10 breaks down into 5 and 2. Again, 2 does not break down, and neither does 5. Okay? Once you've broken down every branch until it can't go any further, we can write it out like this. There are 1, 2, 3, there's 4 2's here. And there's a single 5. Okay? All of those are under the square root. Okay? Once you've written it out like this, it's called a square root for a reason. Okay? Again, you can kind of think of it as the second root. Because it's the second root, you're going to be looking for pairs of numbers. So in other words, I have a pair of 2's and another pair of 2's. I can't circle the 5 because it's alone. Okay? If this was a cubic root, I would look for groups of 3. Fourth root, I look for groups of 4, and so on. Every group can come out of the root one time. It can go out front. Okay? So this is going to turn into, I took out one group of 2's, I took out a second group of 2's, and then everything that's still inside is stuck inside. So that 5 is still stuck. Then all you gotta do is simplify and then we're done. We can actually multiply these out. 2 times 2 is 4, and that square root of 5 is stuck. Okay? And that is an exact answer. Unlike if you were to plug it into a calculator, it would give you like a decimal answer. Okay? Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes we want the exact answer with the root in there. Okay? All right. I want you guys to try one question on your own, and then it'll be the end of the video. Okay? So I would like you guys to try. I want you guys to try and break down square root of 45. Okay? Go ahead and pause this video now, work on it, and then you can press play and you can check your answer. Okay, so you can go ahead and check your answer. So 45 breaks down into 9 times 5. 5 cannot be broken down. And then 9 breaks into 3 and 3. And then we can write it out. And then we had one group of 3's, which can be come out of the root. So our final answer being 3 square root of 5. Okay? If you guys have any questions about this, you guys can message me or we can talk about it during class tomorrow.